I knew Gandalf before he was Gandalf, before he was the Grey Pilgrim who wandered Middle-earth, before he was the wizard who challenged Sauron and fell fighting a Balrog and returned from death itself. I knew him when he was Olórin, a Maia who walked in the gardens of Lórien and spoke softly to elves about hope and courage and the beauty of small things. I knew him when he was afraid, when the thought of going to Middle-earth terrified him, when he believed he was too weak to face the darkness that was rising there, and I watched him become something else, something greater. Not because his fear went away, but because he chose to go anyway. My name is Elenwë. I am one of the oldest elves in existence. I was born in Valinor in the years of the trees, before the sun and moon were made, but before the world knew day and night as you understand them. I have lived for ages beyond counting. I have seen the rise and fall of kingdoms. I have witnessed the breaking of the world and the remaking of it. And of all the things I have seen, few have moved me as deeply as watching Olórin transform from a gentle spirit who feared his own shadow into Gandalf the Grey, the wizard who would save Middle-earth. Let me tell you how it happened. Let me tell you what he was before. And let me tell you why his fear made him the perfect choice. Olórin was a Maia, one of the Ainur, the divine spirits who sang the world into being at the beginning of time. But he was not like the other Maia. He was not bold like those who became the Istari with him. He was not fierce like those who served Aule the smith or Orome the hunter. He was gentle, quiet. He walked in the gardens of Irmo, whom we called Lórien, the master of dreams, and he learned from Nienna, the Lady of Mercy, who taught him pity and patience and the value of tears. He was the wisest of all the Maiar, or so it was said, but he was also the most timid, the most uncertain, the one who doubted himself most. I met him in the gardens of Lórien, where the silver trees grew and the pools reflected starlight even in the day. The gardens were a place of peace, of beauty so profound it could bring you to tears. Flowers that sang, water that held memories, paths that wound through groves where time moved differently, where you could walk for what felt like hours and emerge to find only minutes had passed. It was a place where troubled spirits came to find rest, and Olórin was often there, not because he was troubled exactly, but because he loved beauty, loved quiet, loved the small details that others overlooked. I was young then, or as young as an elf born in Valinor could be, perhaps 300 years old. I had come to the gardens to think, to find peace after a disagreement with my family about whether I should sail to Middle-earth to see the mortal lands. And I found Olórin sitting by a fountain, watching the water and humming softly to himself. The fountain was one of the smaller ones, tucked away in a corner most visitors never found. The water fell in a gentle cascade, creating patterns of light and shadow on the silver stones beneath. And Olórin was watching those patterns with complete absorption, as if they were the most important thing in all of creation. He did not notice me at first. He was absorbed in his observation. But when I approached, he looked up and smiled, and that smile was kind, gentle, without guile or pretense. There was no condescension in it, no sense that he was a divine spirit, and I was merely an elf. Just warmth. "Welcome. Forgive me," he said. His voice was soft, musical, like wind through leaves. "I did not mean to intrude on your solitude. The gardens are large enough for both of us, but I know sometimes one seeks to be alone with one's thoughts." I told him he was not intruding, that the gardens were open to all. And he laughed softly and said, "Yes, but solitude is precious. I should not disturb it without invitation, though I confess I am not very good at being alone. I prefer conversation, learning what others think and feel. There is such wisdom in every perspective, if only we take time to listen. We spoke for hours that day, about small things, or about the beauty of the gardens, about the way light fell on water and created patterns that were never quite the same twice, about the songs of birds and how each species had its own language, its own way of expressing joy or warning or sorrow. He did not speak of great matters or lofty philosophies. He spoke of details, of moments, of the things most people overlook, and I realized that this was his gift. He saw the small beauties that others missed. He valued them, cherished them, and he helped others see them too. "Look at this flower," he said, pointing to a small blossom growing at the edge of the fountain. It was unremarkable, pale blue, tiny petals, the kind of flower you would walk past without noticing. Most people would call this common, unimportant. But look closely. See how the petals catch the light, how each one is slightly different in shape, how the center holds a drop of dew that refracts the starlight into tiny rainbows. This flower has been here for perhaps a week. In another week it will fade and be gone, and most will never know it existed. But right now, in this moment, it is perfect, complete, and that matters. That small, brief perfection matters as much as the greatest works of craft or song. Over the years, we became friends. I would seek him out in the gardens, and we would walk together and talk. And he would listen, truly listen. Not just to my words, but to what lay beneath them. He understood sorrow, understood longing, understood the quiet struggles that elves face, even in paradise. The weight of immortality, the pain of watching others change while you remain the same, the difficulty of finding purpose when every day stretches into eternity. And he offered comfort, not through grand gestures or pronouncements, but through presence, through understanding, through gentle questions that helped you find your own answers. I remember one conversation particularly clearly. I had been struggling with the question of whether to go to Middle-earth. Many elves were sailing there in those years, drawn by curiosity or adventure or the desire to help the younger peoples. But my family wanted me to stay, to remain in the safety and beauty of Valinor. And I was torn, and Olórin listened as I explained my conflict. And when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, "What does your heart tell you?" And I said I didn't know, that my heart was divided. And he smiled. "Then perhaps you are not ready to choose, and that is acceptable. Some decisions require time, require you to grow into them. There is no shame in waiting until you are certain. The choice will still be there when you are ready." But not all his time was spent in the gardens. He also walked in the halls of Nienna. The Lady of Mercy dwelt in the west of Valinor, in a place of mist and gentle rain, where she wept for the sorrows of the world. And Olórin went to her often. I asked him once why he spent so much time in a place of sorrow when he could remain in the gardens. And he looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "Because sorrow is part of wisdom. Joy without understanding of grief is shallow. Happiness that has never known pain is fragile. Nienna teaches me to mourn, to have compassion for those who suffer, to understand that suffering is not meaningless, that it can teach us, shape us, make us better, and that healing is possible, that even the deepest wounds can mend, given time and care and patience." He told me stories of what he learned from Nienna, how she taught him to cry, not from weakness or despair, but from compassion, from feeling the weight of others' pain and honoring it. How she taught him that patience was not passive waiting, but active hope. The belief that healing takes time, but will come. How she taught him that mercy was not softness, but strength, the courage to offer second chances, to believe in redemption, to see the potential for good even in those who had done evil. These lessons seemed abstract to me then, beautiful, but impractical. What use was crying in a world without sorrow? What need for mercy in a place where there was no evil? But Olórin understood something I did not. He was preparing, learning skills he would need, even though he did not yet know where or when or how he would use them. The years passed, centuries, millennia. The rhythm of Valinor was unchanging. Seasons did not exist as they do in Middle-earth. There was no winter or summer, no birth or death, just eternal beauty, eternal peace. And Olórin remained constant, a gentle presence, a friend to any who sought him, always listening, always encouraging, always seeing the beauty in small things, and I grew to love him as a brother, to value his friendship more than almost anything. He was a light in my life, not a bright, blazing light, but a gentle glow, the kind that guides you home on a dark night. The first age of Middle-earth came and went, but we heard news of it in Valinor, the war against Morgoth, the suffering of the Elves who had left the undying lands, the heroism and the tragedy. And when Morgoth was finally defeated, when the Valar came in their wrath and broke Angband and cast the enemy into the void, we thought the darkness was ended, thought the battles were over, thought Middle-earth could heal and grow in peace. We were wrong, because Sauron remained. Morgoth's lieutenant, the most cunning of his servants, and Sauron did not fall with his master. He hid. He waited. He learned from Morgoth's mistakes, and when enough time had passed, when the free peoples had grown complacent, he rose again. Built a new stronghold in Mordor, forged a ring of power that would let him dominate all others, and began his long campaign to corrupt and control Middle-earth. And this time, he was more patient, more subtle, more dangerous. The Valar watched this with growing concern. They debated for years. How could they help without destroying? They had intervened directly against Morgoth, had come with all their power and broken his fortress and reshaped continents in the process. Beleriand had drowned. Countless lives had been lost, and they had vowed never to intervene so directly again, never to risk breaking the world a second time. So they sought another way, a gentler way, not armies but emissaries, not conquerors but counselors, spirits who would go to Middle-earth and encourage its peoples to resist, to find their own strength, to save themselves. And Manwë, the king of the Valar, proposed the Istari. 5 Maia who would volunteer to go to Middle-earth, who would take mortal form, but accept all the limitations that came with flesh, grow old, feel pain, know weariness and hunger and cold, and they would guide without ruling, advise without commanding, encourage without forcing. It was a great sacrifice, a willing descent from divine glory into mortal weakness, and few Maia were eager to accept it. But Manwë called for volunteers, and the summons went out across Valinor, and some stepped forward. Curumo, who had served Olè, and loved craft and order, and believed he could organize Middle-earth into peace. Iwendil, who loved the beasts and birds and growing things and wanted to protect the wild places from Sauron's corruption. Alatar and Pallando, who served Orome and were willing to go into the far east where Sauron's influence was spreading and the need for guidance was greatest. 4 Maia volunteered, good spirits to capable spirits, but Manwe looked for a 5th, and he chose Olórin. I was there when it happened, present in the great hall where Manwe held court. Not because I had any right to be there, but because I had been visiting Olórin earlier that day, and he had mentioned he was summoned to appear before the king of the Valar. And I was curious, concerned, wondering what it could mean. So I came and stood among the crowd of elves and Maia who had gathered to witness, and I watched as Olórin was called forward. The hall was vast, pillars of white stone that seemed to reach into infinity, light that came from everywhere and nowhere, soft and warm and making everything more beautiful than it already was. And at the far end, on a throne that seemed carved from living starlight, sat Manwë, the king of the Valar, or the greatest of the Ainur except for Morgoth, who had fallen, and around him stood the other Valar, Varda and Aule and Yavanna and the rest, powers so great that even looking at them made you feel small, made you aware of how vast the world was and how little you understood. And Olórin walked forward, across that vast hall, toward that throne, and I could see he was afraid. Not trembling exactly, but there was tension in his shoulders, uncertainty in his step. He was being called before powers he served, powers he loved, and he did not know why, and that frightened him. Manwe spoke. His voice was gentle, but it filled the hall, made the very air vibrate with its power. "Olórin," he said, "wisest of the Maiar, friend to elves, student of Nienna, I have need of you. Middle-earth has need of you." And Olórin bowed and waited, but Manwe continued. "Sauron rises again in the mortal lands. He builds armies, forges weapons, corrupts the free peoples, and we cannot intervene directly, cannot send our power to break his stronghold as we did with Morgoth. The cost would be too great. Middle-earth would not survive. So we must send counselors instead, guides, 5 Maiar, who will take mortal form and walk among the peoples of Middle-earth and encourage them to resist, to find their own strength, to stand against the darkness." He paused, let the words settle, and then continued. 4 have already volunteered. Kurumo, Iwendil, Alatar, Palando. They are capable, powerful, wise in their own ways. But I would send a 5th, and I would have that 5th be you, Olórin. I would have you go to Middle-earth, take mortal form, walk among elves and dwarves and men and any others who need guidance, and help them, not by ruling them, not by fighting their battles, but by encouraging them, showing them the strength they already possess, being their friend. The hall was silent, everyone waiting for Olórin's response, and I saw him struggle, saw the conflict in his face, and finally he spoke. His voice was quiet, so quiet that in that vast hall it should have been lost, but somehow everyone heard it. "My lord," he said, "I am honored that you would think of me, but I must confess I do not believe I am suited for this task. I am not strong like Kurumo, not bold like Alatar. I am not a warrior or a leader. I am merely a student, a listener, and I fear Sauron. I fear what he has become, what he is capable of, and I do not think I have the strength to stand against him." And Manwe smiled, a sad smile, a knowing smile, and he said something I will never forget. "You fear Sauron. You understand weakness. You know what it is to doubt yourself, and that, Olórin, is precisely why you must go. The peoples of Middle-earth do not need lords who command from above. They need friends who walk beside them. They need someone who understands their fears, who knows what it is to feel inadequate, who can look at someone who is weak and afraid and say, "I understand. I have felt this too. And you can overcome it. I know you can." Kurumo is strong, but he doesn't understand weakness. Alatar is bold, but he doesn't understand fear. You understand both, and that makes you the most suited of all. Olórin looked down, and I saw tears on his face. Tears of fear, of understanding the weight of what was being asked. And Manwe's voice softened further, became almost a whisper. "I am not commanding you, Olórin. I am asking, and you may refuse. But know this, I believe in you. I believe you have more strength than you know, more courage than you think. And I believe that if you go, you will do more good than any of the others. Not because you are stronger, but because you are kinder, more patient, more willing to see the good in those you serve. That is what Middle-earth needs. That is what Sauron cannot stand against. Not power, but compassion." The silence stretched, and I held my breath, waiting. And finally, Olórin raised his head, and he nodded, just once, and said in a voice that was steadier than I expected, "I will go. If you truly believe I should, if you truly think I can help, then I will go. Though I am afraid, though I doubt myself, I will go." And Manwe's smile widened, and he stood from his throne, and he walked down, across that vast hall, until he stood before Olórin, and he placed his hand on Olórin's shoulder, and said, "Then you have already proven my faith in you, because courage is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to act despite it. And you have made that choice. Remember that in the dark times ahead. Remember that you chose this, not because you were commanded, but because you believed it was right. That choice will sustain you." I spoke to Olórin afterward, found him back in the gardens, sitting by the same fountain where we had first met. And he looked older somehow. Though Maia do not age, he looked worn, burdened, as if the weight of what he had accepted was already pressing down on him. I sat beside him and we were silent for a long time, and then he spoke. "I am terrified, Elenwë, more afraid than I have ever been. I am going to Middle-earth, to a world I do not fully understand, to face an enemy, I fear, to help people I have never met, and I do not know if I am strong enough. But Manwe believes I am, and Nienna has taught me to trust that sometimes we are stronger than we know. So I will go, and I will try, and perhaps that will be enough." The preparations took months. The 5 Maia who would become the Istari were instructed, taught the rules they would operate under. They would go as advisors, not rulers, would encourage, not command, would help the free peoples resist Sauron, but would not fight his war for them, for the victory had to be theirs, not the Valar's, and they would take mortal form, would become old men, would walk the roads and feel hunger and cold and weariness, would forget much of their divine knowledge and power, would be limited, diminished, made small, so that they could walk among mortals as equals. I watched Olórin prepare, watched him say goodbye to the places he loved, to the gardens where he had spent so much time, to Nienna, who wept when he left, but blessed him and told him she was proud, to the other Maia who had been his friends, and I watched him take mortal form, and it was not a pleasant thing to witness. The transformation happened in a chamber deep beneath the halls of Manwë, a place of power where such workings could be done safely. I was not supposed to be there, but Olórin had asked me to come, and had said he wanted a friend nearby, someone who knew him as he was, so he would not forget. and I stood at the edge of the chamber and watched as the process began. It was a diminishment, a compression of something vast and bright into something small and fragile. Olórin stood in the center of the chamber, and the light around him, the subtle glow that all Maia carried, began to fade. Not all at once, slowly, like a candle burning down. And as it faded, his form changed. He grew shorter, his back curved slightly, his hair turned grey, then white. Lines appeared on his face, deep lines around the eyes and mouth, the marks of age and care, and his eyes changed too, lost some of their depth, some of their knowing, because he was forgetting, losing access to the divine knowledge he had always possessed, becoming limited, mortal, or he gasped at one point, a sharp intake of breath, and I realized he was feeling pain for the first time. Real physical pain, the ache of joints that had grown old, the heaviness of a body that could tire, the vulnerability of flesh that could be cut and bruised and broken. And I saw fear in his eyes, real terror at what he had become, what he had given up. But he didn't cry out, did not beg for it to stop, just endured. And when it was finished, when the light had faded completely, and he stood there as an old man in simple grey robes, he looked at me, and I barely recognized him. "This is what I will be," he said, and his voice was different, rougher, less musical, the voice of an old man who had lived a hard life, an old wanderer. "They will call me Gandalf," Manwe said, "the Grey Pilgrim, and I will walk among them and try to help, and I hope I will remember enough, hope I will be wise enough, hope I will not fail them." I embraced him then, held him as I would hold any friend departing on a long journey, and I felt how fragile he had become, how mortal, and I wondered if he would survive, if this diminished form would be enough to face the darkness waiting for him in Middle-earth. But I did not voice my doubts, just told him I believed in him, that I would pray for him, that I hoped to see him again someday. And then he left. He and the other 4 Istari. They walked to the shores of Valinor and boarded a ship that would carry them east, across the sea, to Middle-earth, to the mortal lands, to the war against Sauron. And I stood on the shore and watched the ship until it disappeared beyond the horizon. And I wondered if I would ever see my friend again. But I didn't go to Middle-earth immediately. I stayed in Valinor for many centuries more. But I heard stories. Travelers would come to the undying lands and bring news from across the sea. And sometimes they spoke of the wizards, of 5 old men who wandered Middle-earth, of Saruman the White, who was the chief of the Order and dwelt in Isengard and spoke with lords and kings, of Radagast the Brown, who loved animals and trees and kept to the wild places and rarely spoke to men or elves, of the blue wizards, who went east into lands we knew little about and were never heard from again, and of Gandalf the Grey, who wandered everywhere and nowhere, who meddled in the affairs of all peoples, who smoked a pipe and performed tricks with fireworks and told stories to children, who seemed more interested in small joys than great matters. And I wondered, was this Olórin? Was this the Maia I had known, the one who loved beauty and small things and quiet conversations? Or had the transformation changed him completely? Had the diminishment stripped away what he was and left only a shadow? I did not know, and I worried. Feared that he had lost himself in becoming mortal, that the gentle spirit I had known was gone, replaced by something lesser, something that could not fulfill the task he had been given, but eventually I could bear it no longer. The longing for Middle-earth grew too strong, the desire to see the lands beyond the sea. to walk in the mortal world, to see what had become of my friend. So in the year 1050 of the Third Age, I sailed, left Valinor, crossed the sea, and came to the Grey Havens, where Círdan the shipwright welcomed me and gave me a place to dwell. And I lived there for many years, centuries, and I heard more stories of the wizards, and especially of Gandalf. He was everywhere, it seemed. In the north, walking with rangers of Arna, and teaching them lore they had forgotten. In Rivendell, speaking with Elrond about the movements of the enemy. In the Shire, visiting hobbits and sharing their meals and their laughter and their simple joys. In the south, counseling the stewards of Gondor. In the east, tracking the servants of Sauron through the wild lands. He wandered constantly, never settled, never claimed authority or position, just moved from place to place, encouraging, teaching, warning, preparing people for struggles they did not yet know were coming. And the stories painted a picture of someone very different from the timid Maia I had known. They spoke of cleverness, of cunning, of defiance, of a wizard who challenged kings when they made foolish decisions, who argued with Saruman about the best way to oppose Sauron, who stood against darkness without flinching, who faced Nazgûl and Balrogs and other terrors with courage that seemed impossible for someone who had once been so afraid. And I wondered if I would even recognize him. If 2,000 years in mortal form had changed him so completely that nothing of Olórin remained. If the friend I had known was truly gone, replaced by this cunning wizard. I did not have to wonder long, because he came to the Grey Havens. Not often, perhaps once every few decades. But he would come, walk the docks, speak with Círdan about ships and the sea and the passage to Valinor, rest for a few days before setting out again on whatever errand drove him. And I saw him from a distance on several occasions, an old man in grey robes, tall, leaning on a staff, a pointed hat pulled low over his face, always moving, always purposeful, always ready to depart. But I did not approach him at first, did not make myself known, because I was not sure I wanted to know how much he had changed, not sure I could bear it if Olórin was truly gone. If the gentle Maia I had loved as a friend had been completely consumed by the role of Gandalf the Grey. So I watched from afar, and I waited, and I hoped for courage I did not feel. But then came the day when he recognized me. I was walking near the harbor, watching the ships being built, thinking about nothing in particular. And I heard a voice behind me, Elenwë, just my name, spoken softly, but in a voice I recognized. I turned, and there he was, and standing perhaps 10 feet away, looking at me with eyes that were the same kindness, the same depth, the same gentleness I had seen in the gardens of Lórien thousands of years before. Olórin, I said, and he smiled, that same gentle smile I remembered. Some call me that still, he said, but here I am Gandalf, the Grey Wanderer, and I am very, very glad to see you. We embraced, and I wept, because he was still there, Olórin was still there, beneath the grey robes and the staff and the pointed hat and the worn face of an old man, the gentle Maia who had sat by fountains and spoken of small beauties. He was still there, changed, yes, transformed, but not lost, not consumed, still himself. We spoke for hours, walked the shores of the havens and talked as we had in Valinor, and he told me about Middle-earth, about the work he had been doing for the past 2,000 years. And as he spoke, I began to understand what had happened. He had not lost what he was. He had become more than he was. The timid Maia was still there, the gentle spirit who loved small beauties and quiet moments. But he had been tempered, strengthened. He had learned cunning and defiance, and the courage to stand against darkness. Not because the fear had gone away, but because he had faced it so many times that he had learned to act despite it. "I am still afraid," he told me. We were sitting on a low wall overlooking the sea, watching the sun set. "Every day I am afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of leading people astray. Afraid that I am not wise enough or strong enough to do what needs to be done. But I have learned something, Elenwë. Fear is not the enemy, and fear is a warning. It tells you that something matters, that the stakes are real, that failure has consequences. And if you listen to the fear but do not let it paralyze you, it makes you careful, thoughtful, better. I am a better counselor because I am afraid, because I understand what it feels like to doubt yourself, and that lets me meet people where they are." I asked him about the peoples he served, and his face softened, became almost luminous with affection. "They are remarkable," he said. "Elves and dwarves and men and even hobbits, especially hobbits. They face darkness every day, uncertainty, mortality, the knowledge that their time is brief and their power is limited. And yet they endure, they build, they love, they hope, and they teach me more than I could ever teach them. They teach me that strength is not the absence of weakness, that courage is not the absence of fear, that hope is not the absence of despair. It is the choice to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing, even when every reason suggests you should give up." He told me stories, specific stories of people he had helped. There was a young ranger named Aragorn, descended from the ancient kings of Númenor, but living in exile and uncertainty. "He doubts himself constantly," Gandalf said. "Wonders if he is worthy of his heritage, if he can be the leader his people need." And I walk with him, encourage him, show him the strength he already has, not by telling him he is great, but by believing in him when he does not believe in himself. That is what he needs, not flattery, but faith. There was a dwarf lord named Thorin who had lost his kingdom to a dragon and spent decades planning to reclaim it. "He is proud," Gandalf said. "Too proud sometimes. And I have to challenge him, push back when his pride threatens to destroy what he is trying to build. But I also encourage him, because his dream is not foolish. His kingdom can be reclaimed. His people can have a home again. And he needs someone to tell him that. Someone to believe it is possible." And there were hobbits. So many hobbits. "They are small," he said, "physically small, and they seem insignificant. They care about meals and gardens and comfort, and most people dismiss them, think they have nothing to offer. But I have learned that the smallest people can have the greatest courage. The simplest lives can hold the deepest wisdom. And I love visiting the Shire, sitting in their homes, smoking their pipeweed, hearing their stories, because they remind me what we are fighting for. Not glory, not power, but the right to live simple, peaceful lives, to love and laugh and grow old in safety. That is what matters. That is what Sauron would take from them. And I will not let that happen." As he spoke, I realized what Manwe had seen, why Olórin had been the perfect choice. He understood weakness, understood doubt, understood what it felt like to be small and afraid and uncertain, and that understanding let him meet people where they were. Let him encourage them without condemning their limitations. Let him walk beside them instead of leading from above. He was not a lord, not a commander. He was a friend, a guide. and someone who believed in people when they did not believe in themselves. And that was what Middle-earth needed. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Coming here? Giving up Valinor? Taking mortal form? Living with fear and doubt for 2,000 years?" And he was quiet for a long moment, looked out at the sea, at the horizon where Valinor lay beyond sight and reach. And then he turned to me and smiled. "No," he said. "I was afraid when I came. I doubted myself. I still do. But this work matters. These people matter. And I would not trade this for all the peace and beauty of the undying lands. Because here, I am needed. Here I can make a difference. Here, my fear and my weakness are not failures. They are tools. They let me understand those I serve. And that makes me better at serving them." We met several more times over the years, always briefly, always between his errands. He was constantly moving, constantly working, tracking Sauron's servants, encouraging resistance, building alliances, preparing for the war he knew was coming. And each time I saw him, I saw more clearly what he had become. Not just Olórin, not just Gandalf, but both. A synthesis, the wisdom and compassion of the gentle Maia who had walked in Lórin's gardens, and the courage and cunning of the wizard who had walked Middle-earth's roads for 2 millennia. He had grown into the role Manwe had seen in him, had proven that fear and doubt were not disqualifications for greatness. They were the foundation of it. The last time I saw him before the final war was different. It was in the year 3018 of the Third Age, and he came to the Grey Havens looking more burdened than I had ever seen him. More worn, more aged, if that was possible. And when we spoke, he told me what was happening. The ring had been found, Sauron's one ring, the weapon he had made to dominate all the free peoples. It had been lost for thousands of years, hidden in a river, forgotten. And now it had surfaced, and Gandalf had spent months confirming it, researching, making sure. And now he knew. The final war was coming, the battle that would decide the fate of Middle-earth forever. "I am afraid, Elenwë," he said. We were walking along the shore again, and his voice was heavy. "More afraid than I have ever been, because I do not know if we can win this. The enemy is too strong. We are too few, too weak, and the ring itself is a weapon we cannot use, cannot even keep safely. It corrupts everyone who touches it, turns them into slaves of Sauron's will. We will have to destroy it, send it into the fires of Mount Doom, where it was made. And I do not know if that is possible. I do not know if anyone is strong enough to carry it that far, and then let it go." He stopped walking, looked out at the sea. "I have been counseling and encouraging for 2,000 years, he said. I have helped kings and warriors and common folk find their courage, find their strength. But this is different. This is not about courage or strength. This is about resisting temptation, about carrying a burden that destroys you and then willingly giving it up. And I do not know who can do that. I do not know if such a person exists. You will find them," I said. "You have always found the right person for the task. You see potential that others miss. Trust that gift." And he smiled, a tired smile. "I hope you are right," he said, "because if I choose wrongly, if I lead someone to their death for a cause that cannot be won, I will never forgive myself. But I have to try. That is what I do. That is what I have always done. I am afraid, but I go anyway." He left the next day, walked out of the Grey Havens with his staff and his pack and his pointed hat, and I watched him go. An old man walking alone toward darkness, going to face an enemy he feared, going to lead a cause he doubted, going anyway. because that was what Olórin had always done. Faced his fears, served despite his doubts, tried even when success seemed impossible. And I prayed to the Valar that he would succeed, that his faith in the peoples of Middle-earth would prove justified, that the wizard who had been too afraid to come here would save it, and I did not see him for many months after that. But I heard what happened. The stories spread quickly, even to the Grey Havens, the Fellowship of the Ring. 9 companions who set out from Rivendell to destroy the One Ring, and Gandalf led them, guided them through danger, protected them from the enemy's servants. And in the mines of Moria, he faced a Balrog, a demon of the ancient world, one of Morgoth's most terrible servants, fire and shadow, a creature of such power that even the mightiest warriors would flee from it. And Gandalf stood against it, alone, on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, with the abyss below and the Fellowship behind him. And he broke the bridge, sent the Balrog falling, but it caught him with its whip as it fell, dragged him down, into darkness, into the depths beneath the mountain. And we thought he was dead, thought the gentle Maia, who had been so afraid, had finally met a foe he could not defeat. I mourned him, mourned the loss of my friend, mourned the spirit who had overcome his fear so many times only to fall at last. And I thought about what he had said, about being afraid but going anyway, about trying even when success seemed impossible. And I realized he had done exactly what Manwe had asked, had guided and encouraged and protected, had stood against the darkness, had given everything, and even in death he had succeeded. Because the Fellowship continued, the quest continued, his sacrifice had bought them time, had proven that the darkness could be resisted, that even the most terrifying foes could be faced. But then something impossible happened. He returned. Not as Gandalf the Grey, but as Gandalf the White, sent back by powers greater than death itself, transformed, enhanced, given greater authority and power, because his task was not finished, because Middle-earth still needed him, and he led the final battles, stood at Helm's Deep when the fortress was besieged, rode to Minas Tirith when the city was under siege, encouraged the free peoples when all hope seemed lost, and he trusted the quest to 2 hobbits, to the smallest, most unlikely heroes, and he was right to trust them. The war was won. Sauron was defeated. The ring was destroyed, and Middle-earth was saved, not by the wizards, not by the mighty, but by the small and the humble who found courage they did not know they had, just as Gandalf had always believed they would. I saw him one final time, after the war was won, and after the age of the Elves had ended and the age of men had begun. He came to the Grey Havens to sail home, to return to Valinor. His task was complete, and when I saw him, he was not wearing grey anymore. He wore white, the color of the chief of the Istari, the role Saruman had held and failed, the role Gandalf had never wanted but had proven worthy of 100 times over. He looked different. The weariness was gone. He seemed lighter somehow, at peace, as if a great burden had been lifted. "You did it," I said. "You saved them. Saved Middle-earth." And he shook his head gently. "No," he said. "They saved themselves. Frodo and Sam, Aragorn and the others. They found the courage, made the sacrifices, bore the burdens. I just walked beside them, encouraged them, reminded them of what they already had inside themselves. That was always the task, not to save them, but to help them save themselves." We walked to the ships together, and I had one more question. "Are you glad you came? After everything, after 2,000 years of fear and doubt and struggle, after falling into darkness and fighting your way back, After all the sacrifice and the pain, was it worth it? And he stopped, turned to face me, and smiled that gentle smile I had seen in the gardens of Olórin so long ago. Yes, he said, it was worth it. Every moment, every struggle, every fear, because I learned something here that I could never have learned in Valinor. What did you learn? I asked, and he looked out at the sea, at the ships waiting to carry him home. I learned that being afraid does not make you weak, he said. It makes you careful, makes you wise, as makes you compassionate toward others who are afraid. And I learned that the greatest courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite it, to keep going even when you doubt, to keep hoping even when hope seems impossible. That is what the peoples of Middle-earth taught me, and that is what I will carry with me forever. He embraced me then, one last time, and I felt that he was no longer fully mortal, that the transformation back was beginning, that he was becoming Olórin again, returning to what he had been, but not unchanged, not the same timid Maia who had feared to come to Middle-earth. Something greater, something that had been refined by fear and strengthened by doubt and made truly wise by 2,000 years of walking beside those who struggled. Thank you, he said, for being my friend, for knowing me before, for believing in me when I did not believe in myself. That meant more than you know. And then he boarded the ship, and I stood on the shore and watched as it sailed, carried him west, back to Valinor, back to the undying lands, back to peace and rest and the reward he had earned. And I stayed in Middle-earth. And I remembered the timid Maia who had sat by a fountain and spoken of small beauties, who had been afraid to leave Valinor, who had doubted he was strong enough to face the darkness. And I remembered the wizard he became, Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White, the one who walked beside the weak and encouraged the doubtful and stood against the darkness even when he was terrified. And I understood what Manwë had seen all those millennia ago, what the fear and the doubt had given him, the ability to understand those he served, to meet them where they were, to help them become what they needed to be, not by being fearless, but by being afraid and going anyway. I knew Gandalf before he was Gandalf. I knew Olórin the Maia, the gentle spirit who loved small things and was too timid to lead. And I can tell you this, he was always afraid. From the moment Manwe called him until the moment he sailed home, he was always uncertain, always doubting himself, always worried he was not enough. But he went anyway. He served anyway. He stood against the darkness anyway. He chose courage, even when he felt none. He chose hope, even when it seemed foolish. He chose to believe in people who did not believe in themselves. And that is what made him great. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That is what made him the wizard Middle-earth needed. That is what made him Gandalf,